we go. Welcome everybody to Applying to College for Students with Learning Disabilities and ADHD. My name is Elizabeth Hamblet. I am a learning disability specialist who works at the college level, and here we go. I write about and speak on transition to college for students with disabilities. Some of you may know me from Facebook and from Twitter and from other places. But often when I do my talks, there are folks with questions about the application process, what students should and shouldn't say in their applications, and that is not part of my job as a learning disability specialist at a college. And so luckily for me, I have made some wonderful friends in the field. And today I bring to you, with great kindness from herself on this, Joan Casey, who is a long-established specialist in the field of college consulting for students with disabilities. So Joan, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and I'm very excited to be here. I think that applying to college and students with learning disabilities and ADHD and their families have often had like ups and downs through the school years, and I think that we all should do as much as we can to help each other and share information. And Elizabeth shares information of all kinds all the time, so I'm so thrilled to be here and to pitch in. I've been an educational consultant for 16 years, and it was actually a career change for me. I, like many of you, I have a child with ADHD and a learning disability, and I became interested in schooling and education from that lens. And I went back to graduate school and I trained as an ADHD coach, and then I built this business. And we have a team of 5 here, and about 40% of our clients have a learning disability or ADHD or an emotional or other health condition. So we really love what we do, and we really care deeply about our students and want them to be as successful as possible on this journey. So I have a very ambitious agenda for today. So, all right, why is this not letting me advance for some reason?
Oh, that's a good question. So while you're working on that, let me see if I can successfully pull up my poll. JB, I know you're out there, so there's a little comic relief for some who have been on my previous webinars to see whether or not I can pull this off. So who is attending? Are you a parent and guardian or guardian, a high school special ed teacher? Those folks are probably working. High school counselors, independent college counselors, shout out to the IECs out there. Any administrators, school psychologists, and if you want to use the chat, which I am hoping I have actually enabled properly, let me know if you are not, if you are other, let us know who you are. Okay. All right, so it seems like at least half of our folks are parents, and maybe some are double dipping here, Joan. Oh, and here's our chat. Let's see. Thanks, JB. And one thing, so today we have a question already, Joan, about how the high school case manager can help with transitions. Doesn't seem to see any concerns, wants to know what the rights are. I don't know that we're going to get to rights today, but for the person who posted that question, be sure to email me, and I will send you some information. The rights part on the K through 12 end is really not my specialty, but you may want to check out rights law, and I will send that. I'm going to make myself a note. I will send the link to rights law when I send you guys the link to the recording. So let me figure out how to end polling. All right. There we go. And the double dipper is, JB is a double dipper. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to leave it over to Joan. Thanks so much.
So we're going to cover quite a lot. We'll talk about like whether you should disclose your disability or not in your application. And then if you decide it does make sense, like how to disclose your disability. So I'm still having challenges moving this forward. It doesn't have anything to do with the polling, does it? Sorry about that, folks. Okay. I think, do you have control of the mouse maybe, Elizabeth? Is that possible? And that's why I don't. Okay, because it's not letting me advance. It says give mouse keyboard control to. Sorry about this, folks. Huh. Okay. We'll talk about applying test optional and what does it mean. Different policies for applying to, when you're applying to a university and an LD program, they can be varied policies. So we're going to cover that as well. And then when you fill out applications for learning disability programs, or you do admissions interviews where you want to disclose your disability, or have learning disability program interviews, you want to think about how you describe how you learn. So we'll cover that today as well. We're going to touch briefly on documentation that you need when you're applying for accommodations and services. And then we'll discuss essays, including, you know, if you choose, you want to disclose in your essay how you might want to handle that. All right, this is just not working for some reason. I don't understand why it's not advancing, but does anyone have any tips as to why this is not working for me? Oh, okay. Okay, so considerations when applying, creating a college list, and then we're going to talk about, like, maybe a student isn't really ready to go to college right away, and that's fine. I mean, there are so many pathways. There's no set time frame on when to go to college, so there may be other things that students want to do while they build their skills to be ready for college. And then if we have time, we'll just briefly touch on the kinds of accommodations that are likely to be approved and not likely to be approved in the college setting. And then finally, just some resources that might help you continue to move through this process on your own. Okay. Okay, right. Okay, so applying to college, disclosing a disability. So colleges, you know, they're not really supposed to consider, you know, that you have a disability or that you don't have a disability when they're reading your application. You know, you still, you know, are expected to meet the requirements for entry to the college, but sometimes it does make sense because, you know, they want to understand the whole you. So, you know, there are some instances, for example, when, like, let's say a student didn't take a foreign language, and a college, whether we like it or not, they do have the right to say they expect a foreign language to enter into their particular college. So a question that comes up frequently is a student might take ALS instead of another language. And many colleges will accept that for an entry requirement. But when I'm working with a student that hasn't taken a foreign language or that has ALS, I actually will pick up the phone. I'll first check the website. If I can't get my answers, I call admissions, speak to an admissions counselor. I create a spreadsheet for that student that indicates whether that particular college will expect a language for entry, whether ALS will meet the requirements, and this is really an important piece. Does the college expect the student to take a foreign language once they're at the college, once they've matriculated? That way the student can decide, you know what, I might try a foreign language for the first time, I'm okay with it, or, you know, this college isn't going to be right for me. Likewise, there are certain majors such as international relations or comparative literature where students are expected as part of their major requirement to take a foreign language. So again, if the student was interested in that field, they want to make sure that they can be exempt from that before they apply, ideally. The other thing that's important to keep in mind is that there are expectations at certain colleges for entry, such as like having honors classes and having AP courses. And if you don't have those courses, then, you know, the college may not admit you, and you can't say, oh, well, you know, they should be more understanding. Well, you can say they should be more understanding because I have a learning disability and it's been hard for me to take those classes. However, they can set their own requirements. So it's important to keep that in mind as well. The other thing is, you know, you don't need to disclose it during the admissions process to apply to the learning disability program and for accommodations once you get there, but you certainly can. So let's talk about, like, well, why might you want to apply, disclose your learning disability? Okay. This is going to happen on every slide. This is just crazy. I've never seen anything like this, folks. Sorry about this.
Well, those who attend my webinars know to expect something to happen. So you know, it's all part of real life, right?
I wonder if I stopped the share and reshared if it would help. I don't know.
Why don't you give that a try?
I'm going to try that.
Sure. And while
bear with me for a minute.
I do want to thank you for touching on that. I think, you know, the question of foreign language substitutions, requirements, entrance requirements is one that, you know, just came up. For those of you who don't know, we have, there's a Facebook group on college accommodations where I'm an admin, and we just had a discussion about this yesterday. Colleges don't have to admit students who don't meet their requirements on any level, and there isn't a different standard for students with disabilities. Now, what's important is they can certainly choose to do so. But they don't have to. And also, Joan, what you said about, you know, admissions, even if you get into the college for certain programs that they might want to major in, but also that not disclosing your disability in your application does not mean you can't apply to the fee-based program later or for regular accommodations. All right, you want to give it a try? Let's see how it goes.
Yeah, I did, and it's just not moving forward, and I don't understand why. Elizabeth, while I'm talking, perhaps you could look at your remote control button and see if it's on your end, perhaps.
Yeah, but I don't see any option to advance your slides. So, like, I don't have any arrows or anything.
Okay, all right, very strange. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Well, oh wait, let's see. Now I see yours. Okay.
Okay, so here we go. So why might you want to disclose? I mean, perhaps you have a discrepancy in your academic record. Maybe you took mostly college prep classes in, you know, junior year. You decided to take an honors class, and you're really glad you did because you learned a lot. You mastered strategies and skills of how to tackle that level of class by the end of the year. And it enabled you to take more classes that were challenging senior year, but perhaps your grade wasn't quite as good. So that might be a really good reason to explain that you have a learning disability and why that was an aberration on your academic record, why that course looked different. Sometimes students have a much stronger end of high school than beginning of high school. They have an upward trajectory because maybe, you know, they were overwhelmed when they first got to high school. They, you know, needed to learn strategies and skills, advocate for themselves. So that might be another reason to disclose the disability. I work with a student who is applying to a pretty selective hospitality program at a university, and he had a very strong math score in his SAT, but he had dyslexia and his reading score was not quite as strong. So it made perfect sense for him to write a statement in the additional information section of the application to explain that. And, you know, he got in and that was not a problem. So that is another reason. Sometimes a student might have some kind of a disciplinary issue that was related to their disability. So I can think of students that I've worked with who, for example, might have been bullied and then, like, you know, shoved a student and, you know, got suspended for that. And, you know, the school is going to report that in their, when they send in the counselor recommendations. So the student does need to explain that in the application. So that would be another way. Again, not using your disability as an excuse, but to say, here's what happened, here's what I learned from it, here's how I addressed it so that I won't do this sort of thing in the future. Once in a while, a student might have fewer extracurricular activities, And maybe they, have to spend a lot of time doing their homework, or maybe they have tutoring a few times a week. So their activities are mostly in the summer, and maybe they feel they want to explain that. So that might be another reason that a student would disclose their disability. So how do you do it? How do you disclose your disability? So, your guidance counselor can write a statement in the counselor recommendation. You or your parents need to give them permission to do that. They can't just write about that without your say. If a student is going to ask their guidance counselor to do that, I think they should also write a brief paragraph themselves in the additional information section of the application. It doesn't have to be like a glorious creative essay. It just needs to be straightforward, but it should focus on, how the disability impacted the student during high school, any particular impact that they want to explain. But it should really be very positive, and convey, like, here's the strategies that I've learned. Here's how far I've come. I've built these self-advocacy skills, and the overall message should be, I'm ready for college, in that statement. So sometimes some colleges and universities offer students the opportunity to do admissions interviews. So sometimes it can be very odd for an admissions counselor who reads your application to have met you, and you never brought up that you had a learning disability, yet then you write about it in your application. So it can be nice to touch on that if the interview is with an admissions counselor. I wouldn't do this with those colleges that connect you with alumni interviews. And I probably would not do it when they have a college senior. Some colleges have college seniors work for admissions, do the interviews. I would only have that conversation with an admissions counselor.
Joan, while you're advancing, one of the things I want to mention that people talk about a lot is, and as somebody who works in disability services offices, if you want to do some research about the disability services accommodations that are commonly available and what they offer, please know that those offices are not going to hang up the phone and call admissions and tell them that the student has a disability. I feel bad that there are people worried about that stuff, but I assure you, disability services offices are not going to spend the time writing down a student's name and telling the admissions office that they called and they were asking questions. And what really makes me sad about that is it reveals people's concern that there would be such a bias against students with disabilities that just calling to ask information would mean a student was not admitted. And that's not true.
That's a great point. So applying test optional. So if you are out there, have a high school senior, you know that most colleges have gone test optional because of COVID-19. There just haven't been test dates. So students really haven't even been able to get tests for the most part. So some colleges declared that they would be test optional for 1 year. Other colleges have said they would be test optional up to 3 years because they're really using it as a pilot test case to see if they'll permanently go test optional, which would be wonderful. So in general, if you do have a test, if you have a child who's a senior and they do have a test score, you don't want to submit the score if the scores fall below the middle 50% range. So how do you find out what is the middle 50% range? You can very simply Google name of school, middle 50% SAT or ACT, or many colleges provide really wonderfully detailed information on something called the Common Data Set. They don't all publish it, but you can also type in college name, Common Data Set, and you'll see a wealth of information, including the middle 50% range. So if the student's below, they may not want to submit. But of course, nothing is simple in applying for college. So you need to remember that if the student doesn't submit their scores, there'll be more emphasis placed on their grades and the level of courses they took and things like their essays and recommendations. So let's say a student, maybe their grades are average, but their test scores were a little bit below the middle 50%, but not way below. That student might want to still submit tests because it shows that they, even though I think most of us don't love tests, like it is a piece of information that might be helpful. I think other exceptions include students who might be applying to an engineering major or a business major that has expectation for strength in math. Let's say a student didn't score very well on the reading section, but they had a very high, maybe within the 75th percentile on the math. I would recommend that student, for the most part, apply, submit their scores to that kind of a program. And likewise for reading, if they have an incredibly high reading score and maybe they have a disability that impacts math, you know, if they're going to be a psychology or an English major or a communications or journalism major, it might make sense for them to submit that score. So, you know, nothing is black and white. There's a lot of gray area here. So there are definitely differences in how you apply from college to college. So it's really important to really read the admissions page and the learning disability program page if there is a formal program. So like, for example, at Northeastern University, you have to apply to the college and get admitted first. And then once you're admitted, you can apply to their learning disability program. But they don't accept the application until you've been admitted by the university. Now, there are other colleges that do it completely different. So the University of Arizona has their SALT program, Curry College has their PALS program, and those are examples of two colleges that recommend you apply to the college and university at the same time that you apply to the support programs. I know in the case of SALT, I think they get so many applications in SALT that they want you to get it in early because they want you to get a place. Like, I do think they fill up. There are limits to how many slots they can give out in the SALT program. Sometimes colleges recommend an interview with the support program, and sometimes they require it. So, I mean, those of course have been being done remotely. So you definitely want to know that, and you want to prepare for those kinds of interviews. So one of the best ways to prepare for an interview is you want to make sure you know how your learning disability impacts you. So students need to be able to describe how they learn. And, you know, so often as parents, we really want to protect our kids, and many people don't share the neuropsych evaluation and the educational testing with their child. I think sometimes that they're always trying to boost them up, and they're afraid they're going to read things and not understand. But I do think as they're going off to college, they really, really do need to understand how they learn. And so it is time for them to read their neuropsych evaluation, perhaps with the support of the neuropsychologist that did the testing, or a counselor, or learning center teacher, or even a parent if the parent really feels they understand the evaluation well. And, you know, they want to be able to practice in real plain language how their learning disability affects them. So not using the huge fancy words that are in the neuropsych evaluation, but really saying, like, here's who I am, here are my strengths, I have this learning disability, it affects me in this way, here are the strategies that I've learned to compensate. So, so I think that's really critical. So during an interview or in the application, I just put some sample questions. This is not comprehensive, but if you go on like the Curry Pals or even SALT, it's easy to get copies of the applications, and students should be filling these out themselves. They should be using their own words. And I think this is a really great way. Sometimes I give students these questions early on so I can see, as a way for me to see if they are able to describe how they learn. So, you know, like, can they describe the learning disability in their own words? A lot of the things that I just covered. So, so this is something that's a good exercise even earlier in high school to get them rolling on how to talk about their own learning style. Documentation. So, so lots of colleges will say, colleges and universities will talk about wanting neuropsych evaluations in educational testing within 3 years. Although I find that sometimes if a family picks up the phone, if the student picks up the phone and calls and says, mine's actually a little older, do you think it will be okay? That sometimes they'll say, yes, that's fine. But you do need to check with the college because it really will vary. Some of them are very strict about the 3 years and others are much looser. But Let's say the student, they get in March, they decide where they're going in April. They pick up the phone and say, my testing's 5 years old. Is that okay? If it isn't okay, they can get an evaluation done over the summer. I hate to see families spending so much money if they don't really need to. So keep that in mind. You send your documentation to Disability Services after you accept the offer of admissions, unless, of course, you're applying to SALT or PALS or one of those programs that asked for it with application. But everyone else, you typically submit it once you know where you're going. You don't send the testing to admissions, even if you disclose that. They would just pass it on to Disability Services. And then another thing related to documentation, it's very rare for a college or university to ask for an IEP. I have heard of it, but it's very rare because it's important to keep in mind that the high school IEP and the high school 504 ends in high school because you're shifting for different laws. You're shifting from IDEA to ADA, Americans for Disabilities Act, in college. So something that sometimes has come up is, for whatever reason, some high schools are telling families that they need to shift from an IEP to a 504 during high school because they'll be on a 504 in college. This is not accurate information. I'm sure they're saying this with the best of intentions, but it's not the same 504 plan. So don't ever feel pressure to get off your IEP if you feel that's what you need, because the high school 504 will not carry over.
Oh, Joan, thank you so much. And folks, I am making a list of resources that I will send you tomorrow when I send the link to the video. Joan has brought up so many important things we don't have time to expand on, but absolutely really important to know. Don't worry about what kind of plan they're on, and it has nothing to do with admissions. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, now I'm going to talk about my favorite thing is essays. So I would say with your students and with your children, let them write what they want to write about. But there's some criteria for what they need to choose. So first, they need to tell a story about themselves. They need to bring something to life, and they need to tell a story that matters. It's not just any old story, but it's a story that has meaning and conveys a quality or characteristic about the student that's meaningful and that puts them in a positive light. Now, if you look at the application prompts, a lot of them are things about like, what's a failure that you've learned from? What's an obstacle you've learned from? What's a realization event or accomplishment that's helped you increase understanding of yourself or others? So a lot of the questions, when you really look at them, are about growth. So it doesn't mean the student can't show some vulnerability in the essay, but it should end on a positive note, like to show, here's where I've come. So what we do is we first say to students, let's make a list, please make a list of everything that the college is going to know about you from reading the rest of your application, the obvious things. So they're going to know their grades, the classes they've taken, if they have test scores. They're going to know all their activities, where they worked, they're going to know if their parents were divorced, if they've lost a parent, if they have siblings. And the student, while they're not going to know what the teachers wrote about them in the recommendations, they're going to have a general sense. So those things, are all really clear. So then, we say, okay, let's come up with a list of things that they don't know about you. So again, we're not saying like, don't write about your work experience, but you're going to write about your work experience in a way that's different than you list it in the activities section of the Common App. So for example, there might be a student who's incredibly creative and can like build and design, and they want the college to know that about them because they think that's what really makes them unique. There may be a student that's an incredible musician now, but they weren't always that way. Maybe they were a little arrogant, thought they were a hot shot, and had a big disappointment with an audition that spurred them on. And they really want to tell that story because music has become such a key part of who they are. I'm working with a student this year who volunteered at an urban farm in East Boston. And, he's a wonderful, tolerant kid and always was empathetic to the plight of immigrants. But just working with all these immigrants has really given him this new insight about what that life is like. And then another student didn't really write about COVID-19, but because of COVID-19, he's taking up fishing with his friends because they have to be social distance. And he's realized how much he loves being in nature, and he did a lot of video gaming before this. And so these are things that bring to life what might be found in the application. Now, interestingly, at least some of these students had learning disabilities. So for example, the student that I mentioned that wanted to write about creativity, he was on a family vacation and this like apparently amazing car came by. And when he saw it, he knew he was gonna go home and like redesign the family car, whether dad liked it or not. And I don't think dad actually did like it at first, but he did it anyway. And so he used the prompt. There's a prompt about like getting lost in something that you enjoy and that you lose track of time. And, his disability did come through. He didn't set out to say, I'm writing an essay about dyslexia, but like he probably had one sentence in there that talked about struggling to read and how his grandfather always saw how creative he was. So it was a beautiful essay. Now, sometimes students know they want to write about their disability, and if they want to, that's fine. I do think it's important for students to keep in mind that they want to bring some other aspect of themselves into that essay because they don't want it to look like an essay that a lot of other students might have written. So you want to be interesting. These admissions counselors, sometimes they're up late at night reading these essays, and you want to stand out. It will help in the application. So there's a new essay that's called the optional COVID-19 essay. And most guidance counselors and consultants will tell students, if it's not optional, it's not really optional, you should always answer it. This, however, is an exception. So many of us, I know there are other consultants on this talk today, a lot of webinars, the college admissions folks have been saying, like, we really don't want students to answer this unless they've truly had a hardship. So, students who don't have internet access, students where there's only one computer in the house and their older siblings are home from college and everyone's fighting over it. Maybe they didn't have access to learning. However, if your student with a learning disability was negatively impacted in learning remotely because of their disability, that could be a reason to answer this question. So if they struggled a little bit but still did fine, then there's probably no need to answer the question. All right, so what do you want to think about when you're applying? You're trying to create that college list. So I think the first and most important thing is to do a self-inventory of the help you're getting currently in high school. So do you go to a learning center? Do you have a coach at school? Do you have an executive functioning coach outside of school? Do you have content tutors? Do your parents get you up in the morning? Do your parents remind you to take your medication? Making an honest list of kind of where you're at. And then saying, how do I replace this in the college setting? If it's senior year, you might say, I'm going to work on some things because I want to be more independent about getting up in the morning. I want to be more independent about taking my own medication, but thinking about the things that you're still likely to need. That is what needs to drive your college list, because you want the college to be able to offer the support that you need to be successful. So that's number one. You also want to assess your readiness, and I know Elizabeth has a whole talk on this that another teen, Kyle Kane, and her colleagues gave. So I'm not really going to go into that today. But you also, you as part of your journey, once you identify the support you need, you want to talk to disability services, and get questions asked, look on the website, look at what they offer to make sure the college has what you need. But then beyond that, it's like, campuses have cultures, are they, are these your people? Are there people there that will help you grow as a person? Do they have majors of interest to you? Joining a club or organization is the #1 way students transition successfully to college. So, come up with 2 or 3 things that you're going to try, because that's a really important part of your college experience. Do they meet your academic profile? Like, are you going to be swimming over your head, struggling to keep up because the rigor is more than you're used to? Or, maybe you're somebody that likes to be at the top, like you like to feel like the smartest student in the class. So you want to think about that. and it's all good, whatever makes sense for each individual student. So we could have an entire whole talk on creating a college list. So I'm just going to touch on it a little bit today. I think Elizabeth's book is amazing. Until her book came out, I don't think there was a book like it. And I think every student with a learning disability, I would recommend getting it earlier in high school so that you can read it and kind of understand what to expect as you prepare for college. The K&W Guide for Learning Disabilities is a guidebook. What they do is they send surveys out to colleges and universities, and then those colleges and universities return them. Not everybody returns them, and if they don't return them, they don't end up in the book. So there may be other colleges that have support worth knowing about that are not in the book. There's another, it's called collegesupports.com. We subscribe to this in our office because we like that we can give our students a PDF of each disability service office, the contact, and what they offer. Families can subscribe to that as well if they like. And then aside from, thinking about your learning disability, just in general, you want to figure out, like, what is my criteria for the college search? So online, there are some great free resources. There's Unigo as a site. They have a college map quiz. College Board has the big future section of their site where you can do a lot of criteria searching, looking at majors. And then there's a lot of great college guidebooks out there. The Fisk Guide to College, Princeton Review are two. Colleges That Change Lives is a book about a collection of smaller colleges which don't necessarily have structured learning disability programs, but for certain students with learning disabilities, they can be great places because they're very small, easy to navigate, lots of personal attention. So other things to consider, peer groups. So this might sound crazy, but your roommate can impact your GPA. So if your roommate's partying all the time, it can bring you down. If your roommate is motivated like you can support each other to do well. You want to think about, like, what are the most common types of assessments at the college? And realistically, most colleges will have all of these, exams, papers, and projects, but you can get a sense of, like, what is more common at a particular college. If you, for example, are not somebody that does well on multiple choice tests or the like, you're going to want to do things like research and internships and possibly study abroad. So you want to check all those things and see if they're available. Advising is so critically important that you always want to ask about the advising system, including career advising. And then mentoring is not necessarily formal, but some colleges do a much better job with caring about students and providing those informal mentoring relationships. Students who have a mentor in their college years are much more likely to not only report career success, but satisfaction with life. And only 16% of college students have a mentor. So I advise my students to talk to students they meet on campus and say, does anyone on this campus know you and know your interests? And it's not always necessarily a faculty member either. It could be a dean. It could be somebody they work with in the library. Professors, accessibility, they all have office hours, but they don't always make you feel welcome to attend those office hours at certain colleges. So that's a good thing to investigate. Counseling services. So if a student has seen a psychiatrist or a therapist and that the counseling service on campus may not be enough, they may need somebody in the community. A student might have a history of an eating disorder and they want to make sure there's a clinic in the area. So this is obviously just touching on some of the things that one needs to think about. Location, do you need to be near home for health reasons? Size of college, would you have trouble being in a large lecture if you have a hearing impairment, if you're at a sprawling campus and you have a physical disability? So all of these things you want to think about. So one of the things that we want to help students feel is we want them to feel really good about who they are and where they're headed. And sometimes students are just not ready to go to college right away. And we never want to make them feel bad about that, because who sets the rules? Like, who said you have to go to college the fall after you graduate from high school? So I worked with a student a couple of years ago. She did really well in school, but she had a lot of structure and support from her parents. And she had ADHD and slow processing speed. And she struggled through the fall application season because she took a really tough course load and she was in a play, and her parents and I had a meeting with her, and we had, suggested she cut back on something, and she didn't want to. And when she got into some really nice schools. We had a meeting, and I said, now that it's all over, tell me what that process was like. And she said, oh my God, I'm a disaster. I can't go to college. I'm so disorganized. I can't prioritize. And so that was an easy conversation because I thought I was going to have to talk her into thinking about a year off, and I didn't. So she ended up, she did some science research because she had done that the summer before at a lab in Boston. And then she did a program that's right outside of Boston. It's a day program. So if you don't live around here, unfortunately, it's not accessible to you, but it's called Semester Off. And she worked on skills and strategies because she just didn't really have time during high school. And I'm really happy to report that she went off to college and did really well and was really successful. So sometimes taking a step back can be a really great thing. Students can go to community college for 2 years or even just for a little while. Students that maybe college isn't right for them, they can try the construction trades. They can even go to college after that if that's not right for them. There's so many options that students can pursue. So I would encourage students to do that. I think we're wanting to wrap up. So just quickly, there is common accommodation requests. Again, the college will decide after they review your documentation what you are eligible for. But this is just an example of some of the things that might be available. And then there are definitely things that students might get now that they won't get in college. And these are some of them, things like alternative assignments, word banks, those will not be available. So it's important to keep that in mind and to plan accordingly if you need to develop those skills or maybe start to withdraw slowly some of those supports. And one final word on the being ready for college. I know, like, for a lot of parents in the audience, you've probably heard teachers say, well, you're not going to go with him to college, you got to get ready. And that's a really hurtful thing for parents to hear because you're doing your best and you want your child to succeed. And so I think that a better way to say that is to say, let's help the student get the skills and strategies and self-confidence in place so that they can meet their transition goals, even if that means doing something else for a while. So we want to empower these kids and we want them to feel really good about their journey and we want them to be successful. So I already mentioned Elizabeth's book, the K&W Guide, Colleges That Change Lives. The FAIR test has like a comprehensive list of all the test optional policies. College Board and ACT have some good resources for creating college lists. We have in our area, we have a NESCA that does neuropsych evaluations, and they have a transition services team. Trends in Assistive Technology is an article I wrote for IECA, and it mentions a person named Joan Green, who's a great consultant for helping. Elizabeth also had a team of people that did a presentation on assistive technology who are also great resources. And then Annie Tulkin runs a practice called Accessible College for those with physical disabilities and health issues, and that is also a great resource. So that is it. And I imagine we have some questions, and I am so sorry for the thing at the beginning about the slides. So hopefully we gave you enough information here.
Oh, it wouldn't be an LD advisory webinar if not challenges. So first of all, thank you for making me feel better. But oh my gosh, Joan, I mean, my neck hurts from nodding my head here, along with so many things that you said. I mean, and folks, now you know why I seek out Joan for information, because she really knows this so much, this field so well, and she has so many great insights. I see a thank you, that was so helpful. Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that the kind of insight that Joan provides too, and what you just said about, well-meaning people who perhaps in not the most wonderful way say, this is what your student's going to need and you need to get them ready. Look, one of the things I always say is there are plenty of neurotypical kids at college who aren't ready to be there. And, some of them don't get invited back and some of them muddle through. So I think rather than framing it that way as this, sort of accusatory thing, I think to say, what you said about confidence was something so important. I think students know when they're ready. I mean, not all of them. Sometimes they have an inflated sense of their own abilities, but the best way to find out what those are is to start to scale back. And always, as you also said, before you pull back on the accommodations or the supports, make sure somebody's teaching them the skills they need, like test preparation and things like that, to make sure that they have those skills so that when you pull back, you haven't just pulled the rug out from under them, that they're really ready. So, folks, I made a list of follow-up resources that I am going to send you along with the link. This will all be on YouTube tomorrow. And Jonah has already referenced other webinars that some wonderful professionals have done for us that are available right now on my LD Advisory YouTube channel. If you go under videos, all the ones that I have hosted are there. So Joan, let me go back because we have had some really good questions. And the first one was a question about, you mentioned disciplinary records. How far back, does that go? Do you have any idea?
Usually it would just be high school. So if a student was suspended or had something that happened in high school, they are asked about that in the application. And, sometimes something happens at school and they have a consequence, but the school isn't considering it a formal suspension. That doesn't need to be reported. The Common App doesn't ask about the criminal, arrests and convictions anymore, but some of the individual schools do. So those are just things to keep in mind.
Okay, that's interesting. Somebody asked, and by the way, folks, if I am misrepresenting your question, just jump back in the chat and clarify for me. Should the disclosure mention the 504? So if a student's going to disclose in the application process in some way, should it mention the 504 or the IEP? And again, for the asker, if I misunderstood your question, go ahead and clarify.
If you think that's information is important, but normally it would be something more along the lines of, you'll notice that, I've done really well in school, but my math performance has been consistently a little lower in that I'm only finishing high school with Algebra 2. I wanted to explain that I have a learning disability that impacts X, and that's the reason for that. I'm not planning on majoring in anything that's related to math, and I know I'll excel in blah, blah, blah. So, I personally have not found it common that students mention whether they're on a 504 or IEP, but I'm not going to say there would never be a reason. I just can't really think of a reason.
Okay. Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah. I think, and again, thanks again for mentioning, Joan, that you don't send the 504 or the IEP with the application. And I would question actually whether or not a lot of admissions offices would even get that stuff to the Disability Services Office, because honestly, until students are enrolled, accepted and enrolled at the college, that's just paperwork for the office to hang on to and not know what to do with. So yeah, let's save those trees, folks. Although I guess it's not trees anymore, right? It's boy, I just revealed my age, didn't I? Holy cow. Okay. We had a question. Is there any circumstance in which you would suggest students not disclose?
I think that if a student is doing really well in school and they, there's just not really any reason to. I mean, some students might be applying to schools that are more selective. And, again, college admissions offices are not supposed to, take that information and have it impact their admissions decision one way or the other. But we all know that people are human and you don't always know who's reading that. And if it's a college that doesn't commonly have a lot of students with learning differences, I mean, maybe it's not a good idea. I mean, so if there's not really a reason, then I probably wouldn't.
Okay. We had a question about counselor recommendations, and one of our attendees today is a public school counselor. So I'm going to read his answer and then please jump on. So the question was, What does the school counselor typically say in their recommendation letter? Are they limited to reiterating what's in the 504? We asked our counselor, but she did not give us any real information. So our public school counselor said that he talks about the student and their 10-year plan and links the student's life to their goal and walks through how the next step fits into that. Mentioning the disability is not the norm unless it helps explain the student's future goals and path from here and now. And then the letter of recommendation is about talking story, as the Hawaiians say. Oh, I love that. Or how the students' expectations for college fit their goals and demonstrate a previous performance. So, Joan, I don't know, do you, we've obviously got counselors from private schools, and also public. Do you know anything about what they generally would put in?
Well, I mean, every public school is so different. It depends on the kind of public school. I mean, some public schools get a lot of parental input, so they give parents an opportunity to write like what they call a brag sheet or some kind of sheet, and the parent can disclose, put that in there. Like, I think it's remarkable how little Johnny has, excelled in this, given this, and so that's like their way of giving permission. So, I mean, again, I would probably only include it if it was going to put the academic record in context, in that it seemed like it was going to be useful information to the college so that they could better evaluate the student, and it would put the student in a positive light. Yeah, so I don't know if that answers the question. I think it's so hard. I don't know if in this case, is the counselor putting this information in because the family asked him or her to do that?
I mean, I think that's a really good point. And certainly I would like to think school counselors at any kind of place would be sensitive to, privacy issues and asking first and foremost. And, certainly if you're not sure what's going to go in it, I would have the student directly address it with, the counselor and say, I would really prefer that you didn't mention it. By the way, there's no legal obligation for counselors to mention it. And so, I am not an expert on FERPA by any means. It's not, I wouldn't think, a violation of FERPA for them to disclose it because it has to do with educational, oh my gosh, I forget the wording from FERPA, but let's not fall down that rabbit hole. Bottom line is, students should ask their counselor if they are planning to, and if they are, they can certainly ask that they not do so. They're never going to find out, obviously, because those letters are confidential. But also, if they want them to mention it, then they should tell the counselor directly. Don't make it a guessing game if it's an issue to the students. And Joan, I want to say one thing too is, if the parents are going to do the communication for any reason, they should also check with the student and find out what the student's desires are. Those of you who are working in this field know the term self-determination. And actually, Joan gave us a great example of self-determination with that student who had gotten through her process and gotten into a bunch of schools, and she recognized she wasn't ready to go. So she made her own decision that this was not the right move for her. So I think that's really important. Okay, I have some feeling I have bad news for this person who's asked, any recommendations for more programs in the West or the West Coast besides University of Arizona and University of Denver? Oh, I know.
There's not that many, not formal programs. There are some that have, I mean, I think sometimes a big state university isn't always right for everybody, but some of the larger state universities have some decent structure. So I think it's certainly worth checking that out. But off the top of my head, nothing's coming to me.
Yeah, I've noticed the lists tend to be sort of east of the Mississippi River. Yeah. And a lot of them clustered between, let's say, Boston and Washington, D.C. So, as Joan said, though, colleges that change lives, these small schools may have the kinds of supports that you're looking for, a lot of, teacher to student contact that's really helpful and maybe more comfortable. So there are lots of different ways to approach this. But if you are looking for one of those fee-based services like U of A, yeah, they tend to be clustered over here. All right. Is there a single good, this is a great question, single good source for honest information on how supportive a school is for students with ADHD and slow processing speed? All schools talk a good game if you call them.
Yeah, I think that's really challenging because, there's even schools that like were a go-to school for me that like weren't even in K&W Guide, but I knew they did an amazing job because they had an amazing disability services coordinator. And then like that person left and then it changed. So like I'm constantly checking, even if I had a conversation 2 years ago with a college, because things change. So unfortunately, I guess the best thing to do is to try to talk to students on campus if you can, like try to get some names of students from disability services if they're willing to give you that.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I do, and I think most disability services people are pretty honest. I mean, my experience is that they don't typically oversell. So I think that they're a great resource, and I think they're pretty honest resource. I mean, Elizabeth, you are one, so
Well, look, I mean,
do you agree?
I would agree. I think it's really important. Look, we want it to be a good fit. We don't want students to come expecting things that we can't make available. That makes for unhappy students and unhappy staffers. So I think, again, I want you to feel really reassured that if your student calls us to ask questions, we are not taking their name down. If your student's really worried about that, your student can give us a fake name. We're not going through caller ID looking to see what the phone number was. Again, and I'm not trying to belittle people's worries about that. I know you hear all sorts of things from all sorts of people. So I want to, be respectful of that. I am just telling you, we are not going to, it's not our job to fill seats. That's enrollment management. We don't talk to them. I mean, maybe at schools that have the dual enrollment programs, and you can ask them that question, but it is hard. So, I think Joan's made some great suggestions. I will mention again, and it will be in the link when I send you folks that email tomorrow. Or you can find it on your own. I am in and so is Joan, a college accommodations Facebook group. And so, the caveat about asking questions about particular schools is you should never generalize one student's experience anywhere to your own kid's experience. So that is really important. You can, some people have said, my kid did not have a good experience at the school. Some students have said mine has, but it is another resource. And we don't allow students in that school. You could certainly try contacting a parent who said their student goes to a particular school and see if their student would be willing to talk to your student. So it is a challenge, and I wish, there were a better way to do it, but I think that Joan's given some great suggestions. Let's see, how do I support and encourage my reluctant child to admit that they need support? Woo. There you go. That's a challenge.
That's a tough one. I know. You mean, I don't know if you mean in the college setting. Actually, it's somewhat common. I mean, I think that there are definitely students that are like, that was high school. I'm putting it behind me now. I'm going off to college and it's going to be all different. And, we do talk to students a lot about that throughout the time we work with them, how it's an insurance policy, like register for your accommodations and services or whatever is appropriate for you. If you think you don't need them, great. You don't need them. But people like Elizabeth, I think will tell those students that after you have your first exam, if you don't do well on it, and then you go over to disability services, then you're going to join hundreds of other students who did the same thing you did. And you're probably going to wait 2 or 3 weeks to get everything set up because it's like a mad rush. So,
right.
Helping students see like, you wouldn't drive a car without insurance. This is just something that you should do. And starting early if possible. And as to, the whole idea is to be successful. I know you don't want to like scare students, but like if they're really excited about leaving home and not living at home anymore, which often they are, students sometimes if they go off and they don't access support, they end up getting on academic probation and having to take time off, then they're home. And, you know, they regret that. I mean, we can't always prevent our students from making bad choices as hard as we try. But it's a tough one. It really is.
Yeah, I mean, this person has clarified that he doesn't feel he needs services at school, but is written in oral language or in need. How do I encourage him to self-advocate? I mean, I think at some point, as Joan said, you know, if he's not getting the services, you know, at least at the high school level, it's, you know, I think it's hard to make people accept help that they don't want. So maybe you could make it goal directed. And, you know, look, a lot of high school seniors don't know what they want to do for the rest of their lives, and who can blame them really? Who's making those decisions? And so, you know, maybe you know, maybe the lack of interest and support is, you know, is sort of a learned helplessness. It may just also be ambivalence about what happens next. I mean, if the whole goal of getting support is to do well in school, and then you can get into whatever kind of school, you know, is interesting to you, then, you know, if you're not feeling that motivated about college, none of that really seems important. So, I mean, it's a challenge. I'm not really sure I have a better answer, and I'm gonna keep scrolling through so we can get wrapped up. Let's see. Do public schools have more LD resources than private schools? Oh, I'm gonna lob this one up for you, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily. I mean, yeah, some private schools don't have much at all. Some private schools have great services. You know, American University has a really nice support program. University of Denver, Curry College.
Those are fee-based, right? Now, what about their regular disability services?
I think they're regular disability services. You mean for accommodations and that sort of thing? And then, you know, like writing centers, like academic support that's accessible to all students on campus. It is good. So, there is some, like, there's a small school here in Massachusetts that's not in the K&W guide called Westfield State University. It's out near the Berkshires, and they have a structured fee-based program that's really, you know, quite good. And most people don't really know about it. Maybe they have something like that in their own area. So it really does vary. And some students who don't need the structured program, but they need like the mid-level support where, you know, they have maybe a contact in disability services that they can meet with, but then they're going to be using like writing math centers. Like lots of public universities are really good at that level, but like anything else, you have to check. So.
So I'm going to be sending you folks in the links tomorrow, a link to one of my blog posts. When I wrote my book, I interviewed disability services directors at a variety of kinds of schools. And so what's really important to know is that you'll find there's a lot of similarity from community college to public and private institutions, large and small, to an Ivy League institution where I spoke to disability services directors. So as far as the accommodations available, they're often very similar. And I will also send you the reason from the book, there's a disability services research form that you can use to start looking. And look, the internet can be a really great tool for starting to do some initial research on what they say their, you know, their common accommodations are. Do they offer workshops? You know, sometimes things that I find, and it's mostly parents, honestly, not the students who are looking for, you know, do they do time management workshops? Sometimes that's through the tutoring center. Sometimes that's through the counseling services center. So even if it's not being run by us, it might be available. And so you want to expand your search beyond that. There was a question in the group a couple of weeks ago, and Joan, you've touched on this. What if my student is looking for a mentor? Well, disability services may not have a mentoring program, but maybe, you know, the Dean of Academic Support's office does those things. So, you know, if it's for some reason important to your student for that to be run out of the disability services office, you want to make sure before they get there that those things are there and arranged by the office that your student is interested in. Oh, and Joan, we have from Carolyn Wheeler heard that St. Edwards in Austin, Texas, and I know I'm going to pronounce this wrong. My apologies. Gonzaga.
Gonzaga. Yep.
Gonzaga. Yep. Sorry, I know they're a big sports team for something. And Spokane have good programs. So, well, west of the Mississippi. There we go.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I was at St. Edward's it's in Austin. So right. Like the little school opposite the big UT. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So let me just make sure. We have a link here from JB. I'm going to put collegescholarships.com. So colleges with, it's the link to a list of colleges with fee-based services, I think. And so lastly, and then we're going to wrap it up, but you can contact Joan. You can see her email address right there, or just go to her website. There's a contact link there too, Joan.
Oh, actually there isn't. There should be. It's educationaladvocates.com is the website.
Okay, so you can contact her that way with any follow-up questions. But the last question is, what are the accommodations that the school can offer? I think, can you click back? You had.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's just revisit that. There you go. All right, so extended time for exams, reduced distraction setting for exams, reduced course load, note-taking services, priority registration, assisted tech, substitutions for courses using a laptop or calculator for exams, and maybe a private dorm room. So again, I'll send you the link to accommodations that these schools commonly offer, and then the link to those that they don't. You want to click to that one real fast, Joan?
Sure. Yeah, and just keep in mind that it doesn't guarantee you're going to get them, especially, for example, during COVID right now. I mean, things like note-taking would look differently because there's recorded classes. And so, it's still a meeting with disability services where they make recommendations. They might not always give students everything they want, but if it's reasonable, they usually do.
Yeah, and also there has to be a disability services appeals process specific to disability services. So if students don't get what they want, they certainly should appeal. And again, in the book, I go into discussion at length, many why some of these things are not available to a lot of students, what the circumstances are, what they should do. But I think what's really important is to start educating yourself now, before students get to college, about the kinds of things that are commonly available. And, sort of, I hate to use this phrasing, but prepare for a worst case scenario and be pleased if they get more. So in this group that we keep talking about, you'll see parents who say, my student got this, my student got that, the kinds of things that aren't commonly available. So you certainly don't know until you ask what will be there. But it is important to know, and I go into the research from this big study on accommodations that was done a bunch of years ago. But certainly things like alternative assignments are not commonly offered, alternative testing methods are not commonly offered. And one that's a subject of a big discussion all the time is extended deadlines for papers, which is a very common K through 12 accommodation, but not a common college one. So with that said, Joan, thank you so much. This was terrific.
Thank you. It was so great. I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
You touched on so many important things. And so folks, I will be sending you all these links and the link to the video. And if it's okay with you, I'm going to put you on my mailing list, which I don't use very often except to announce upcoming stuff. I don't have anything on the calendar right now, but you never know when that might change. So thank you all for coming. I hope you got something out of it. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.